You're just the cleaning lady. This area is off limits to people like you." The words cut through the sterile conference room like a knife. Dr. Maya Chen, pushing her maintenance cart in her faded blue uniform, had just been publicly humiliated by TechVision's head engineer, but Marcus Brennan had no idea who he'd just insulted, or how badly his arrogance was about to cost him. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. in the cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. Maya Chen silenced it quickly, careful not to wake her teenage daughter Sarah sleeping on the pullout couch across the room. At 52 years old, Maya's hands bore the marks of hard work, calluses from years of scrubbing floors, chemicals that had dried her skin despite the gloves she wore religiously. Her morning routine was precise, almost mechanical. She braided her graying black hair into a tight bun, pressed her maintenance uniform until the creases were sharp, and laced up the worn sneakers that had seen 3 years of polishing corporate floors. The name tag pinned to her chest read simply, "Maya Evening Maintenance." What the name tag didn't say was that Dr. Maya Chen held a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT. That she'd published 12 peer-reviewed papers on thermodynamics and fluid mechanics. That she'd been a rising star at Chen Aerospace until the company collapsed 5 years ago, taking her career, her savings, and her husband's life with it when the stress triggered his fatal heart attack. The corporate bankruptcy had been brutal and swift. One day Maya was leading a team of 15 engineers on cutting-edge aerospace projects. The next, she was standing in an unemployment line with 200 other suddenly jobless professionals, watching her entire industry crumble like a house of cards. The recession had hit aerospace particularly hard, and Chen Aerospace, despite its innovations, couldn't survive when 3 major contracts were cancelled simultaneously. At 47, Maya found herself in an impossible position. The job market was flooded with younger engineers willing to work for less. Her resume, impressive as it was, couldn't compete with age discrimination that no one would admit existed. Hiring managers saw her PhD and 20 years of experience and worried she'd be overqualified or too expensive or not adaptable to new corporate cultures. Those were the polite rejections. Most companies simply never responded to her applications at all. Meanwhile, the medical bills from her husband David's final hospital stay piled up like snowdrifts. His heart attack had been sudden and catastrophic. 3 weeks in intensive care. Emergency surgery. Experimental treatments that insurance refused to cover. When he died, he left behind a grieving wife, a traumatized 13-year-old daughter, and $340,000 in medical debt that bankruptcy couldn't erase. Maya had tried everything. She'd applied to over 200 engineering positions in 18 months. She'd contacted former colleagues, old professors, industry contacts. She'd offered to take junior positions at half her previous salary. She'd removed her PhD from her resume, hoping that would make her seem less threatening. Nothing worked. The rent came due every month whether she had engineering work or not. Sarah needed food, clothes, school supplies. The electricity bill didn't care about Maya's credentials or her grief. So when a maintenance position opened at TechVision Industries, $18 an hour with health benefits, Maya swallowed what remained of her pride and applied. She told herself it was temporary. Just until she found something in her field. Just until Sarah graduated high school. Just until they got back on their feet financially. Just until the world remembered that she was more than her current circumstances. 5 years later, Dr. Maya Chen was still pushing a maintenance cart through the gleaming halls of TechVision Industries, still waiting for temporary to become permanent, still invisible to the people whose offices she cleaned. Maya caught the 5:15 a.m. bus, watching the city wake up through smudged windows. Other passengers dozed or scrolled their phones, but Maya reviewed engineering journals on her tablet, a luxury she'd saved for months to afford. She kept her mind sharp by reading about advancements in her field, even if she'd never get to apply them again. Her subscription to the Journal of Mechanical Engineering cost $200 annually, money she could barely spare, but giving it up would mean admitting her old life was truly gone forever. She read about innovations she could have developed herself if circumstances had been different. She saw citations of her own published research from years ago, Papers that younger engineers were building upon without knowing the author now mopped their floors. Sometimes former colleagues published work that built directly on her theories, and Maya felt a complicated mix of pride and loss, proud that her ideas still mattered, devastated that she couldn't contribute to their evolution. The bus rolled through neighborhoods that reflected Seattle's stark economic divide. Sleek condominiums gave way to older apartment complexes, tech campuses transitioned to industrial warehouses, the haves and have-nots separated by a few miles in an unbridgeable economic chasm. TechVision Industries occupied a massive glass tower in downtown Seattle, a monument to innovation and ambition. The building itself was an engineering marvel, 30 floors of climate-controlled perfection, designed to showcase the company's expertise in environmental systems. The company specialized in advanced HVAC and climate control systems for commercial buildings, data centers, and industrial facilities, exactly Maya's area of expertise from her previous life. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 20 years designing systems like the ones TechVision manufactured. Now she cleaned the offices where others designed them, invisible and forgotten, her expertise gathering dust while she gathered trash. She clocked in at 6 a.m. sharp through the service entrance, a different world from the marble and glass main lobby where executives and engineers entered. The service area was purely functional, concrete floors, fluorescent lights, time clocks that tracked every minute of labor. Maya exchanged quiet nods with other maintenance staff, mostly immigrants and older workers like herself who'd fallen through society's cracks. Carlos Martinez, the day shift supervisor, greeted her with his usual warm smile. He was one of the few people at TechVision who treated maintenance workers like human beings rather than furniture. Morning, Maya. Big day today, CEO's flying in from the New York office for the quarterly board presentation. Brennan's team is unveiling their new climate system prototype, the one they've been working on for 2 years. Maya nodded, collecting her supplies from the equipment room. She'd heard the buzz about the project for months. TechVision had invested $50 million developing a revolutionary cooling system for data centers, facilities that consumed massive amounts of energy keeping servers from overheating. If successful, the technology could save millions in operating costs and reduce carbon emissions significantly. It was exactly the kind of work Maya used to do, the kind of challenge that used to make her wake up excited to solve problems. They say if Ashford approves it today, Brennan's getting promoted to VP of Engineering before his 35th birthday, Carlos continued, shaking his head with a mix of admiration and skepticism. That guy's career moves faster than our floor polishers. Marcus Brennan was the golden boy leading the project. At 34, he'd climbed TechVision's ranks with remarkable speed, more through aggressive self-promotion and strategic political maneuvering than actual groundbreaking innovation, from what Maya had observed over the years. She'd seen his type before in her previous career, brilliant enough to be dangerous, articulate enough to be convincing, but lacking the wisdom and humility that came from real failure and genuine collaboration. Maya had once attended a presentation Brennan gave about thermal efficiency. She'd been cleaning the lecture hall afterward and had stayed to watch from the back. His technical knowledge was solid but not exceptional. What made him successful was his confidence, his ability to sell ideas with charisma rather than substance. He reminded her of colleagues who'd advanced quickly while more talented but less politically savvy engineers stayed in middle management. She'd also noticed how Brennan treated support staff. He didn't make eye contact with maintenance workers, didn't acknowledge assistants who held doors open, didn't say thank you to the cafeteria workers who served his lunch. These small cruelties spoke volumes about his character in ways his polished presentations never could. Marcus Brennan's world. Marcus Brennan's morning started very differently. His midnight blue Tesla Model S pulled into TechVision's executive parking garage at 7:45 a.m., deliberately late to make an entrance. His custom-tailored Armani suit probably cost more than Maya made in 2 months. His Apple Watch buzzed constantly with messages from his team, calendar reminders, stock alerts, the digital heartbeat of a life where every minute carried monetary value. Everything rode on today. If CEO Richard Ashford approved the climate system before the board, Marcus would be promoted to Vice President of Engineering before his 35th birthday. Stock options worth potentially millions. Corner office on the executive floor. His name on patents that would define the next generation of environmental technology. Magazine profiles. Industry awards. Everything he'd worked toward since graduating from Stanford would culminate in the next 6 hours. But there was a problem. A significant, potentially catastrophic problem that Marcus's team had been troubleshooting for 3 weeks without success. The prototype's efficiency ratings were inconsistent. During stress tests, the system experienced pressure fluctuations that caused random shutdowns in nearly a quarter of all test cycles. Nothing that caused permanent damage, but enough to make the performance data fundamentally unreliable. Marcus's 3 lead engineers, all with impressive credentials from top universities, couldn't identify the root cause. They'd tried 17 different calibration adjustments, tested alternative coolant formulations, and modified valve configurations. Nothing resolved the intermittent failures. And time had run out. Marcus's solution, developed over several sleepless nights and increasingly desperate strategy sessions, was simple: bury the problematic data in the presentation, emphasize the successful test cycles, and hope that CEO Ashford and the board didn't ask too many penetrating questions. After all, once they secured manufacturing approval and funding, they'd have months to fix the bugs during the beta testing and production phases. That's how innovation worked in the real world: you sold the vision, then refined the execution. At least, that's how Marcus justified it to himself in the mirror each morning. He strode through TechVision's lobby like he owned it, Italian leather shoes clicking against imported marble, barely acknowledging the receptionist who called out a cheerful "Good morning, Mr. Brennan." He took the executive elevator, a privilege reserved for director-level staff and above, to the 15th floor where his team occupied an entire wing of engineering labs, testing facilities, and conference rooms. The engineering department was TechVision's crown jewel, a $40 million facility filled with state-of-the-art equipment, computer systems running complex thermal simulations, and prototype testing chambers that could replicate any environmental condition on Earth. It was everything Marcus had dreamed of when he'd chosen engineering over his family's expectations that he'd join their law firm. Status update. Now. Marcus barked as he entered the main lab where 6 exhausted engineers hunched over computer screens displaying endless cascading streams of performance data, thermal readings, and pressure measurements. Jennifer Park, his second-in-command and the engineer who actually understood the system's complexities better than Marcus did, looked up with tired eyes ringed by dark circles. She'd clearly been at the lab most of the night, running yet another round of diagnostic tests that Marcus knew in his gut wouldn't reveal anything new. "We ran 17 more simulations overnight with the modified valve configurations you approved yesterday," Jennifer reported, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and too much coffee. "The pressure fluctuations are still appearing randomly in 23% of test cycles. We still can't identify a clear pattern or causation. It's like the system develops random instabilities that we can't predict or replicate consistently." Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his carefully maintained stubble. "Then we don't mention it in the presentation. We focus exclusively on the 77% success rate. That's still revolutionary for the industry standard. Current systems don't even reach 60% efficiency." "But Marcus," Jennifer protested, her professional integrity warring with her fear of confronting her volatile boss, "if we can't explain why it's failing almost a quarter of the time, we can't guarantee performance in real-world applications. Data centers run 24/7 under sustained thermal loads. These aren't laboratory conditions. If the system fails in an actual facility, it's not failing, Jennifer. It's experiencing minor calibration issues that will resolve during the beta testing phase." Marcus's tone left absolutely no room for argument, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that his team had learned meant the conversation was over. "That's how you present it to the board. Ashford doesn't need to know about every tiny hiccup in the development process. He needs to see the vision, the market potential, the competitive advantage we're offering. Do you understand me?" The team exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Marcus's aggressive leadership style, his tendency to shoot messengers who brought bad news, didn't encourage dissent or honest dialogue. 3 engineers had quit the project in the past year, citing creative differences in their exit interviews, though everyone knew they'd left because Marcus's management approach was toxic. The pressure squeezed Marcus's chest like a vice. Everything he built, every strategic career move, every calculated risk, it all came down to the next few hours. And somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the bravado and the justifications, a small voice whispered that he was making a terrible mistake. He silenced that voice with another cup of coffee and reviewed his presentation slides one more time. The collision course. Maya's morning cleaning route took her through TechVision's building systematically, a choreographed dance she'd perfected over 5 years. Lobbies and common areas first while they were still relatively empty, then executive washrooms on floors 20 through 30, followed by conference rooms, break rooms, and finally the engineering wing on the 15th floor. She moved through TechVision's world like a ghost, just another member of the maintenance crew that people look through rather than at. Executives passed her in hallways without breaking their phone conversations. Engineers brushed past her cart without slowing down. Administrative assistants made copies while she emptied trash cans as if she wasn't even there. Maya had learned to accept her invisibility. It hurt less than the alternative, the occasional recognition from a former colleague or conference acquaintance who'd see her pushing a mop, their expression shifting from confusion to recognition to pity to embarrassment in the space of 3 seconds. Those moments were worse than being invisible because they forced both parties to acknowledge how far she'd fallen. She'd learned not to make eye contact. Not to remind people that she existed. Not to speak unless spoken to. The rules of invisibility kept her employed and her daughter fed. By 8:30 a.m., Maya was cleaning the 15th floor corridor outside the engineering wing. Through the glass walls, TechVision believed in transparent innovation. She could see Marcus's team preparing for their afternoon presentation. Large monitors displayed technical schematics, thermal flow diagrams, and efficiency calculations that made Maya's fingers itch to hold a stylus again, to work through differential equations, to solve problems that mattered. She recognized the system design immediately. It was remarkably similar to a prototype she'd worked on 8 years ago at Chen Aerospace before everything collapsed. Her eyes traced the coolant flow paths almost unconsciously, following the pressure regulation nodes, analyzing the thermal exchange interfaces like reading a familiar language she'd been forbidden to speak. And even from 15 feet away, looking through glass walls at a schematic displayed on a monitor, something looked fundamentally wrong about the pressure valve configuration in what appeared to be Sector 7 of the system. Maya forced herself to look away, gripping her mop handle until her knuckles turned white. Not your world anymore, she reminded herself fiercely. Not your problem. Not your place. Just clean and move on. You tried to be an engineer again and the world said no. Accept it. But her mind couldn't stop analyzing what she'd seen. That valve placement would create a feedback loop under sustained thermal load. The pressure differential between sectors 6 and 8 would cause oscillating instabilities that would grow exponentially until system failure. She'd seen this exact problem in her doctoral research, had published a peer-reviewed paper about it in 2011. If they manufactured that system as designed, it wouldn't just fail randomly in testing. In a real data center under continuous high-load operation, it would fail catastrophically within 6 months. Coolant leaks. Pressure explosions. System shutdowns. Potential equipment damage worth millions. Safety risks for facility workers. Maya shook her head, trying to dislodge the thoughts. She had no proof. She'd only glimpsed the schematics for a few seconds. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe TechVision's engineers, young, energetic people with current industry experience, had accounted for factors she wasn't aware of. Maybe her knowledge was obsolete. Maybe she was just a cleaning lady now, and it was time to accept that. She was polishing the glass walls when Marcus emerged from the lab, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight with barely controlled stress that radiated off him like heat. I don't care what it takes, the presentation is at 2 p.m. and everything needs to be absolutely perfect. Yes, perfect. I'm not interested in excuses or last-minute problems, he nearly collided with Maya's cleaning cart, stopping just short as soapy water sloshed dangerously in her yellow plastic bucket. "Watch where you're going," Marcus snapped without bothering to look at her face, his eyes still on his phone screen. To him, she was just an obstacle, no different than a piece of furniture temporarily blocking his path, something to navigate around rather than acknowledge. "I'm sorry, sir," Maya said quietly, immediately moving the car aside, making herself smaller, less intrusive, more invisible. Marcus was already past her before she finished speaking, still barking instructions into his phone about presentation slides and board member preferences, his expensive shoes clicking away down the corridor. Maya returned to polishing glass that didn't need polishing, trying to ignore the burning sensation in her chest that felt like shame mixed with anger mixed with something she couldn't quite name. Grief, maybe. For the person she used to be. For the respect she used to command. For the voice she'd once had that people actually listened to. She cleaned in silence, invisible once again, while behind the glass walls engineers prepared to present a system that she knew, with the absolute certainty that came from 2 decades of expertise, was fundamentally flawed. And she told herself it wasn't her responsibility to say anything. She told herself right up until the moment when staying silent became impossible. At 1:30 p.m., Maya was scheduled to clean the executive conference room on the 20th floor, the same room where Marcus Brennan would present to CEO Richard Ashford and the board in exactly 30 minutes. She timed her work carefully to finish before the meeting started, as she always did. In 5 years, Maya had never once interfered with a business meeting or drawn attention to herself during important company events. The executive conference room was TechVision's crown jewel, designed to impress investors and intimidate competitors. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of Puget Sound, the Olympic Mountains rising majestically in the distance. A massive mahogany table that could seat 20 executives dominated the center of the room, its surface polished to a mirror shine. State-of-the-art presentation equipment, an 85-inch 4K display, surround sound audio system, video conferencing capabilities, lined one wall. The room probably cost more to furnish than Maya would earn in 10 years of janitorial work. Maya had cleaned this room hundreds of times, always with the same meticulous attention to detail. She wiped down the windows until they were invisible, polished the table until she could see her reflection, arranged the executive chairs at precisely equal intervals, ensured the temperature was set to exactly 68 degrees as specified in the facility's manual. She was halfway through the windows when Marcus's team began arriving early, wheeling in equipment carts loaded with laptops, backup drives, presentation materials, and technical documentation. Jennifer Park entered first, looking exhausted but professionally composed in a navy blazer and pressed slacks. 2 junior engineers followed, their arms full of bound reports for each board member. Maya worked faster, trying to finish the windows before she became an obstruction. She'd learned over the years to make herself as small and unobtrusive as possible during these moments, to compress her presence until she was barely noticeable, just another piece of equipment in the room. Marcus entered last, holding a tablet and reviewing his notes with the intense focus of someone whose entire career depended on the next hour. He was dressed in what Maya recognized as a Tom Ford suit. She'd seen the price tags in magazine advertisements, easily $4,000 or more. His tie was probably Hermes, his shoes definitely Italian leather. Every detail of his appearance screamed success and confidence. He glanced up from his tablet and saw Maya near the windows, and his expression immediately shifted to irritation, as if her mere presence was a personal affront to his important day. "Why are you still here?" His voice carried sharp impatience, the tone of someone addressing an inconvenient problem rather than a human being. "Just finishing the windows, sir." "I'll be done in 2 minutes," Maya replied, keeping her voice neutral and professional, the same tone she'd perfected over 5 years of avoiding confrontation. "We need this room now. You'll have to come back later." Maya began gathering her supplies quickly, carefully wrapping her window cleaning cloths and securing the spray bottles on her cart. "Of course, sir. I understand completely. And take that cart with you. This is a board-level presentation, not a cleaning supply showcase." Marcus's dismissive tone made Jennifer Park, who was setting up the projection system, visibly wince. Even she seemed uncomfortable with her boss's casual cruelty, though not uncomfortable enough to say anything. Maya nodded silently, pushing her yellow maintenance cart toward the door, her face carefully neutral even as humiliation burned in her chest. This wasn't the first time she'd been spoken to like this, and it wouldn't be the last. Invisibility came with a price, and that price was swallowing your dignity dozens of times a day. But as she passed the large presentation monitor that Jennifer had just activated, Maya's eyes caught on something that made her stop involuntarily, her body freezing mid-step as if she'd walked into an invisible wall. The pressure valve configuration. Sector 7. Right there on the screen in full technical detail. It was exactly what she'd suspected earlier, a critical design flaw that would cause cascading failures under sustained thermal load. She'd seen this exact problem 15 years ago during her doctoral research at MIT, had published a peer-reviewed paper about it in the Journal of Mechanical Engineering, had presented her findings at 3 international conferences. The valve placement created a thermal feedback loop that would intensify exponentially under continuous operation until catastrophic system failure occurred. This wasn't a minor calibration issue. This was a fundamental engineering error that would destroy the entire system within months of deployment. The confrontation begins. "Excuse me." Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting through Maya's analysis like a blade. "Did I say you could stop and stare at proprietary technology?" Maya blinked, realizing she'd been standing frozen, staring at the screen with the intense focus of an engineer analyzing a complex problem. Her hand was still gripping the cart handle, but her body had betrayed her, revealing her expertise through her posture and attention. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Maya started to apologize, to retreat back into invisibility where it was safe. "This is a restricted presentation containing confidential company information. Do you even understand what you're looking at?" Marcus's tone was condescending, the way someone might speak to a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. Maya hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize again, to leave quickly, to protect her job and her daughter's health insurance. But something in Marcus's tone, that casual assumption of her ignorance, that reflexive dismissal of her potential value, triggered something she'd buried for 5 years. Pride. Professional integrity. The memory of who she used to be before the world decided she didn't matter anymore. Maya's voice was quiet but steady. "Actually, I do understand it. And I think there might be a problem with your pressure valve configuration in Sector 7. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. For a moment, Marcus just stared at her, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then something darker. His face flushed slightly, the red creeping up from his collar as anger replaced his initial shock. Then he laughed. It was a cruel sound, sharp and mocking, designed to humiliate rather than express genuine amusement. "You think there's a problem? You." He emphasized the word like an insult, stepping closer to Maya in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. "Let me guess, you took a community college course once? Watched some YouTube videos about engineering? Read a popular mechanics article?" "No, Maya tried to explain, but Marcus cut her off with a sharp gesture. "This system was designed by MIT graduates with decades of combined experience. We've invested 2 years and $50 million in development. We've run over 200 test cycles with sophisticated computer simulations. But sure, the cleaning lady spotted something that 3 PhD engineers all missed." His voice dripped with sarcasm, each word calculated to diminish her. "That makes perfect sense." Jennifer Park shifted uncomfortably near the presentation equipment, her eyes darting between Marcus and Maya. The 2 junior engineers had stopped unpacking materials and were watching the confrontation with obvious discomfort but no willingness to intervene. Maya felt her face flush, heat spreading across her cheeks as humiliation warred with professional certainty in her chest. She knew she should stop, should apologize and leave before this got worse. But she also knew, with the absolute confidence that came from 20 years of expertise, that she was right about the design flaw. "I was just trying to help," Maya said, her voice quieter now but still steady. The pressure valve configuration in Sector 7 will create thermal feedback under sustained load. The differential pressure between Sectors 6 and 8 will cause oscillating instabilities. That's enough. Marcus cut her off with a sharp hand gesture, his voice rising to a level that echoed off the conference room's glass walls. You're just the cleaning lady. This area is off limits to people like you. Do you understand? People like you. The words landed like physical blows. People like you. Maya had heard variations of that phrase countless times in her life. When she'd been the only woman in her engineering program at MIT. When venture capitalists had dismissed her startup ideas before Chen Aerospace. When younger hiring managers had looked at her age and immigrant last name and decided she didn't fit their company culture. When society had decided that her value ended the moment she couldn't maintain her previous economic status. But hearing it said so nakedly, with such undisguised contempt, in a field she'd once mastered and loved, it cut deeper than all the previous instances combined. It wasn't just about her credentials or her current job. It was about her fundamental worth as a human being, her right to have a voice, her value beyond the uniform she wore. I apologize for overstepping, Maya finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying a dignity that no amount of humiliation could completely erase. I'll leave immediately. She turned toward her cart, hands trembling slightly as she gripped the handle. Just leave, she told herself. You tried. You spoke up. That's all you can do. Your daughter needs this job. The health insurance is worth more than your pride. But Marcus wasn't finished. The stress of the upcoming presentation, the unresolved technical problems his team couldn't solve, his own deep-seated insecurities about whether he truly deserved his rapid advancement, all of it found an outlet in this moment. This woman, this cleaning lady who dared to question his expertise in front of his team, represented everything that threatened his carefully constructed image of superiority. The escalation. Wait, Marcus called out, his voice stopping Maya mid-step. She paused, cart half-turned toward the door, hoping against hope that he was reconsidering his cruelty, that some shred of decency would emerge. Instead, Marcus picked up a coffee cup from the conference table, still half full of cold coffee left over from an earlier meeting, and deliberately, slowly, poured it onto the floor that Maya had spent 20 minutes mopping to perfection just an hour earlier. The dark liquid spread across the polished tiles in an expanding puddle, staining the pristine surface that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. Since you're so eager to help and share your expertise, Marcus said, his voice dripping with mockery, you missed a spot. Maybe you should focus on the job you're actually qualified to do instead of pretending to understand things that are way above your level. Maya stared at the spreading coffee puddle, feeling something crack deep inside her chest. This wasn't about engineering anymore. This wasn't even about the presentation or the technical flaws she'd identified. This was about power, about someone who needed to feel superior by pushing someone else down, about casual cruelty disguised as professional hierarchy. Jennifer Park finally found her voice, her professional discomfort finally overriding her fear of Marcus's volatile temper. Marcus, that's completely unnecessary and unprofessional. She works in maintenance, Jennifer. Cleaning is literally her job description. Marcus's eyes never left Maya's face, watching for her reaction like a predator enjoying the hunt, savoring the moment of dominance. I'm just giving her an opportunity to demonstrate her actual skills instead of wasting our time with engineering fantasies. Maya knelt slowly, her knees protesting as they pressed against the hard floor. The arthritis that had developed from 5 years of physical labor sent sharp pains up her legs, but she ignored it. She pulled paper towels from her cart with trembling hands and began wiping up the spilled coffee, her movements mechanical and precise despite the humiliation burning through her entire body. The purple MIT class ring she still wore, the only piece of her old life she couldn't bear to sell even when the medical bills had been at their worst, caught the fluorescent light as she wiped. The ring had cost $800 when she'd bought it 27 years ago, a symbol of achievement and belonging to a community of scholars and innovators. Now it mocked her, a reminder of how far she'd fallen, how little those achievements mattered when circumstances changed. "That's better," Marcus said, his voice satisfied and cruel. "Know your place. Stay in your lane. That's advice that will serve you well in life." The words would haunt him soon enough. But in that moment, Marcus Brennan had absolutely no idea that the woman kneeling on his conference room floor, wiping up coffee he'd deliberately spilled, held a PhD from the same institution he loved to name-drop at networking events. That her doctoral thesis on thermodynamic systems had been cited in over 200 academic papers. That she held 3 engineering patents that were still being used in aerospace applications. That she'd forgotten more about mechanical engineering than he would ever learn in his entire career. He had no idea who he'd just humiliated with such casual viciousness. And he was about to find out in the worst possible way. Maya finished cleaning the spill in silence, her face carefully neutral even as tears of humiliation and rage threatened to break through. She stood slowly, her knees aching, and pushed her cart toward the door without making eye contact with anyone in the room. As she reached the doorway, she heard Marcus address his team with renewed confidence, his voice carrying the self-satisfied tone of someone who'd just reasserted his dominance. "Now, let's focus on what actually matters. We have 30 minutes before the CEO arrives, and I want this presentation to be absolutely flawless. Jennifer, pull up the efficiency data from test cycles 47 through 89. We'll lead with our strongest numbers." Maya paused in the hallway, her hand still on her cart, her mind racing. She thought about her daughter Sarah, working after school at a coffee shop to save for college. She thought about the health insurance that covered Sarah's asthma medication and her own blood pressure prescriptions. She thought about the $1,400 monthly rent on their studio apartment that consumed most of her paycheck. She thought about all the practical reasons to stay silent, to let Marcus Brennan present his flawed system to the board, to protect her job and her daughter's future by remaining invisible and compliant. But she also thought about professional integrity, about the engineer's oath she'd taken 25 years ago to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. She thought about the facility workers who would be at risk when that system failed catastrophically. She thought about the millions of dollars that would be wasted, the jobs that would be lost, the company's reputation that would be destroyed. And she thought about Marcus Brennan's words, "You're just a cleaning lady. People like you." Dr. Chen had spent 5 years being invisible, accepting society's judgment that her value had diminished when her circumstances changed. She'd swallowed her pride thousands of times, buried her expertise under layers of silence and compliance, convinced herself that staying quiet was the same as staying safe. But some lies are too dangerous to ignore. Some moments demand that you speak truth to power regardless of the personal cost. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Maya stood in that hallway for 30 seconds that felt like hours, her entire future balanced on a knife's edge. Every practical instinct screamed at her to walk away, to protect what little she had left. But the engineer inside her, the part of Chen that had never truly died despite 5 years of invisibility, wouldn't let her stay silent. Her hand was trembling as she turned her cart around and pushed the conference room door open.